Have you ever stopped to think about what really changes in your life when you decide to put yourself first? It may seem like a simple question, but it has the power to completely transform the way you see your own life. Now think with me for a moment. And if much of the emotional fatigue you feel today doesn't just come from the responsibilities you carry, but because you almost always put yourself last, how many times have you said yes when deep down you wanted to say no? How many times have you taken on problems that weren't even yours just to avoid arguments, not disappoint someone or keep peace around you? This situation is much more common than it seems. Many people spend years living exactly like this, trying to please everyone, trying to be understood, trying to live up to the expectations of family, friends, coworkers, and even people who may not make that much of a difference in their lives. And in the midst of this silent effort to serve everyone, something very important begins to happen. These people begin little by little to abandon themselves. There is an emotional pattern that many people learn without realizing it. From an early age, many of us hear that being a good person means always helping, always understanding and giving in whenever possible. And in fact, helping and caring for others is something beautiful and necessary. The problem starts when this turns into a constant habit of ignoring yourself. When you start to always put other people's needs above your own. When you accept responsibilities you shouldn't carry. When you avoid expressing what you feel for fear of people's reactions. Over time, this behavior creates enormous emotional toll. The mind starts to get tired. The heart begins to become overloaded, and self-esteem gradually decreases, often without the person realizing it. Many people believe this is just part of adulthood. They think the problem is the hectic routine, too many tasks, or the pressure of modern life. But in reality, there is often something deeper going on. When you spend too much time trying to live up to everyone's expectations, you start to lose something essential: connection with yourself. You stop asking what you really feel. You can't understand what you really need. And little by little, your inner voice begins to become quieter and quieter. But something very powerful starts to happen when one person finally decides to change that. When someone learns to put themselves first, we are not talking about selfishness. We are talking about emotional awareness. We are talking about self-respect. And this change generates profound transformations. One of the first things many people notice is the disappearance of that constant feeling of guilt. That feeling that you always owe someone something starts to lose strength. At the same time, something begins to be rebuilt within you. Your self-esteem. You come to recognize that your emotions also have value, that your limits deserve respect, that your needs are no less important than anyone else's. And with that comes something that many people haven't felt in a long time: emotional freedom. The constant need for approval begins to diminish. The pressure to please everyone loses intensity, and self-respect begins to grow in a silent but very powerful way. When this happens, your relationship with the world also changes. You stop living just trying to meet other people's expectations and start living in a more authentic, more conscious, and emotionally more balanced way. And perhaps the most important reflection is this: perhaps the problem was never that you cared too much about people. Maybe the real problem was that for a long time you forgot to care about yourself. And when this realization finally appears, a new stage begins. Because learning to put yourself first doesn't just transform your emotions, it also begins to profoundly change the way your mind works. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. Before continuing, I want to make a quick invitation. If at any point in this conversation you realize that you also tend to put yourself last, write a simple but very powerful sentence here in the comments. I also need to choose myself. It may seem like just a sentence, but it represents an important commitment to yourself. Furthermore, by commenting, you help this content reach other people who are also going through this same emotional process. And if this type of reflection makes sense to you, take the opportunity to leave a like on this video. This helps a lot, so that this message reaches more people who may need to hear it accurately. Remember this today. And if you like content about emotional health, self-knowledge, mental balance, and ways to protect your inner peace area, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Because here we talk about exactly those things that no one often explains clearly: how to take care of your mind, how to strengthen your emotions, and how to develop a more balanced life. And now comes a very interesting part. Because learning to put yourself first doesn't just change your emotions. This decision also begins to transform the way your brain works. And when that happens, something surprising starts to happen inside your mind. But that's exactly what we're going to explore now. Now we need to talk about something that many people only realize after living on autopilot for a long time. When you spend years putting yourself in the background, trying to please everyone, avoiding conflicts, and taking on emotional responsibilities that shouldn't even be yours, something starts to happen inside your mind. At first, it feels like a little more mental fatigue, perhaps a constant worry, maybe that feeling of always thinking about 1,000 things at the same time. But as time passes, this pattern begins to transform into something bigger, a constant state of psychological pressure. The mind is busy all the time trying to anticipate problems. You start to think a lot before saying something. You try to predict how people will react, and you often end up worrying excessively about letting someone down. It's as if the brain is always monitoring the emotional environment around it, always evaluating, always trying to avoid any kind of conflict. The problem is that living like this requires a huge amount of mental energy, and the strangest thing is that many people have lived like this for so long that they begin to believe that it is simply part of their personality. They think things like, "I'm an anxious person. I've always been like this. I worry a lot about everything." But this is often not a natural personality trait. In fact, it may just be the result of years of living under a constant pattern of approval and emotional adaptation. When you spend a lot of time trying to live up to everyone's expectations, your brain learns to function in a permanent state of alert. It's as if the mind is always prepared to avoid some emotional problem. This mental state can generate several signs that many people know very well: repetitive thoughts before bed, constant worry about what others will think, exaggerated fear of disappointing someone, difficulty making simple decisions, and that strange feeling of always owing someone something. All of this consumes a huge amount of psychological energy. The brain starts to function as if it is solving problems all the time, even when there is no real problem happening at that moment. But something very interesting starts to happen when a person finally learns to put themselves first. And here there is a very important point that needs to be clear. Prioritizing does not mean becoming selfish. This doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It just means stop abandoning yourself. It means recognizing that your mental health also deserves space, respect, and protection. When this change begins to happen, the brain begins to function in a completely different way. One of the first changes many people notice is a reduction in anxiety. This constant feeling of worry begins to subside. This happens because when you establish healthy limits, your mind stops carrying emotional responsibilities that should never have been yours. At the same time, the level of mental stress begins to decrease. The brain no longer needs to process so many unnecessary worries. And with that comes something extremely valuable: mental clarity. When you stop trying to please everyone, your mind gains space to think more calmly. Decisions that previously seemed confusing start to become simpler. You begin to see more clearly what really matters in your life. And along with this clarity comes a feeling that many people haven't felt in a long time: a sense of control over their own lives. For a long time, when you live trying to live up to other people's expectations, it seems like your life is being directed by external opinions. Choices are no longer made based on what you really need. They start to be made based on what others expect of you. But when you learn to put yourself first, something changes profoundly. You start to make decisions more consciously, more safely, and with much more alignment with what really makes sense for your life. There is another very important change that few people talk about. When your mind stops wasting energy trying to please everyone, a huge amount of mental energy becomes available again. This energy begins to be geared towards things that really matter: personal projects, professional growth, take care of your own health, moments of true rest. Your ability to concentrate also improves because your mind is no longer busy trying to solve invisible emotional problems all the time. This is why learning to set limits is not just an emotional attitude. It's a real way to protect your mental health. Every boundary you set acts as a kind of protective barrier around your psychological peace, a way to tell the world that your peace of mind also has value. And perhaps there is a very important phrase to always remember: every time you say yes to something that destroys your peace, your mind ends up paying the price. Now I want to ask you a question. Have you ever realized at some point in your life that you were saying yes to things that were harming your mental peace? If this conversation made sense to you, write a simple sentence here in the comments: "My peace of mind also matters." Or if you prefer, comment, "I'm learning to prioritize myself." By commenting, you not only strengthen this decision within yourself, but you also help others who are going through the same situation to realize that they are not alone. And now comes something that few people realize at the beginning of this journey. When you learn to put yourself first, this change doesn't just happen in your emotions, and not just in your mind. Your body also begins to respond in surprising ways. And understanding this can completely change the way you see caring for your own life. That's exactly what we're going to talk about now. There is a very important point in this conversation that many people only realize after a long time of living under constant emotional pressure. When someone spends years putting themselves last, trying to please everyone, taking on emotional responsibilities that aren't theirs, and carrying concerns that should never be on their mind, this burden doesn't just stay in their thoughts. It also starts to appear on the body, often silently. The human body is extremely sensitive to what happens inside the mind. Whenever you live in a constant state of worry, anxiety, or emotional pressure, the nervous system interprets this situation as a warning sign. For the brain, there is not much difference between a physical danger and an emotional danger. If there is constant tension, the organism automatically goes into survival mode. In this state, the body activates the sympathetic nervous system and begins to release hormones linked to stress, such as cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones are important in specific situations of challenge or danger. They help the body to react quickly. The problem arises when this state of alert becomes permanent. When someone constantly tries to avoid conflicts, please everyone, take on emotional responsibilities, and ignore their own needs, the body starts to function as if it were dealing with a threat all the time. And this begins to generate various physical signals. One of the first signs is usually constant tiredness. Even after sleeping, the person wakes up feeling like they haven't really rested. The mind remains racing, the body remains tense, and the exhaustion never seems to completely disappear. Another very common sign appears in the quality of sleep. Many people have difficulty sleeping soundly or wake up several times during the night. This happens because the brain still works in a state of alert. When the mind cannot fully relax, the body cannot enter truly restorative sleep. Muscle tension is also a very common reflection of this type of emotional overload. Rigid shoulders, tight jaw, heaviness in the neck or back. These signs are ways that the body finds to deal with excess accumulated stress. In this context, frequent headaches may also arise, often related to prolonged mental tension. Additionally, the immune system can also be affected. When the body lives under constant stress, much of the body's energy is directed to dealing with this state of alert. As a consequence, immunity may decrease. This can make a person more vulnerable to frequent flu, infections, or a constant feeling of physical weakness. The digestive system also tends to reflect this emotional state. Discomfort in the stomach, a feeling of heavy digestion, or changes in appetite are often directly linked to the level of stress the person is feeling. All this happens because mind and body are deeply connected. What you carry emotionally ends up manifesting physically. But the good news is that something very interesting starts to happen when a person learns to put themselves first. When you start setting limits, healthy and respecting their own emotional needs, their nervous system begins to slowly come out of this state of constant alert. The body understands that it no longer needs to remain in survival mode all the time, and this change generates several positive effects. One of the first improvements usually appears during sleep. With less emotional pressure and less accumulated anxiety, the brain can more easily enter a state of deep relaxation. Sleep becomes more restorative, the mind slows down, and when you wake up, the feeling of energy begins to increase. Muscle tension also tends to decrease, breathing becomes deeper, the body starts to feel lighter. Over time, the immune system also tends to strengthen because the body is no longer dealing with a constant state of stress. And along with all these physical changes comes something that many people describe in a very simple but extremely significant way: a general feeling of well-being. It's not just the absence of physical symptoms. It is the feeling that there is a greater balance between mind, emotions, and body. Energy stops being drained by constant worries or emotional responsibilities that should never have been yours. That's why it's so important to understand something essential. Putting yourself first is not just an emotional decision. It is also a profound act of taking care of your own health. Every healthy boundary you set protects your mind, preserves your emotions, and helps your body break out of that silent state of exhaustion. Perhaps the most important reflection of this entire conversation is this: taking care of yourself is not selfish. Often, this is exactly what protects your peace, strengthens your mind, and restores balance to your own body. Now, I want to know something from you. At some point in your life, have you ever noticed that emotional stress started to appear in your body as well? If this has ever happened to you, write here in the comments, "My body feels it too." Or, if this conversation made you realize something new, comment, "I'm learning to prioritize myself." By sharing this, you are also helping others understand that emotional health, mental health, and physical health are deeply connected. And if you resonate with this conversation, perhaps this is a great time to take a simple but important step. Subscribe to the channel here, because here we talk about exactly those things that many people are living in silence: emotional health, self-knowledge, mental balance, and practical ways to protect your inner peace amid the pressures of everyday life. And if this video made sense to you, leave a like now. It may seem simple, but liking really helps this content reach other people who may need to hear this exact message today. And before leaving, I want to invite you to make a small decision. If this video touched you in any way, write one of these phrases in the comments. "Today I choose myself," or "My peace is also important." These words seem simple, but they represent a powerful decision. And when you write this, it also inspires others who read the comments to realize that they are not alone in this journey of learning to put themselves first. Now also take the opportunity to watch the next video that is appearing on the screen, as it will delve into exactly this topic and can help you even more in this process of taking care of your mind, your emotions, and your life. Thank you very much for staying here until the end. I really hope that this reflection helps you live with more awareness, more balance, and much more respect for yourself. See you in the next video.